attendance with the exception of Ms. King. And that brings us to visitor comments, and I believe we have visitor comment. I have Orrin Bossert.
All right. Hello, my name is Orrin Bosser. I'm a senior at Southern Lehigh. I've been going to the district for many years. I went to Hopewell Elementary, and now I'm at the high school. And I've spent many hours in all of our district's libraries. I think the intermediate school takes the cake for the best library. It is beautiful, and it was a well-used resource. And as the steering committee has started for the high school libraries renovations, I think we need to first address the environment and time around the library. Because as we are renovating a new space for the environment for the library, we need to not just focus on the physical aspect of the library, but also the time that students are able to spend in the library. As it currently stands, I believe one of the main reasons why students do not utilize this part of our building is because there isn't any time for it. All of our day is, of course, spent in classes, with the exception of a 30-minute Spartan period. This Spartan period is a incredibly, in realistic sense, short period. It is 30 minutes. And for a student to go to the library, they would need to first go to their main Spartan period, then get a pass, meet with any friends that they're meeting at the library to study or just hang out with. But they are oftentimes not allowed to hang out or study in this library because there's no one to supervise them. Our current person who spends the most time in the library, Mrs. Lentz, oftentimes is not there. She is in various other parts of the building, such as the attendance desk or in the counselor's office. So, as we move forward with addressing some issues regarding the library, I think we need to take into account these two main reasons as to why our students are currently not using the library as it stands. First is we do not have time. There's no specific allotted time in our current schedule in which it is incentivized for students to use other parts of the building besides their average classroom. Additionally, students are largely not using this part of our building because there is not a supervisor or professional there who knows truly the ins and outs of the library. Having someone who can help both just supervise and with research projects or education as a whole is a vital part when building up this environment. We cannot just focus on the physical aspect of the library, but also the time and environment surrounding this entire space. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the only visitor comment we have, the first visitor comment period of the evening. I'll move to superintendent updates.
Yes, we have a very busy agenda tonight, so I'm going to be very short. I want to amplify, Mrs. Gaiman, your congratulations and gratitude to our veterans. You're going to see some examples of great success in the school district academically tonight. All you do is pick up the newspaper and you see all the great successes that we have athletically. We have a big game coming up on Thursday. But if there's one thing that we do especially well, in my observation here, it is honoring our veterans. We had a wonderful, amazing parade today at the IS. I was able to get, I would like to get to all the buildings, but I couldn't. I just was able to get to Hopewell, and we had veterans and parents and grandparents. The work that's done here, K through 12 in all of our schools to honor our veterans is just a remarkably positive thing, and remarkably well received by our veterans too, who come out in force and driving their cars and waving. So I just want to thank everybody and just make the observation that Southern Lehigh does our veterans proud, just as our veterans have served us so very well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Curriculum, student, and staff services. We have first up on the docket, we have a presentation from Karen Trinkle and our school administrators on student achievement. I'll turn it. Oh, okay, great, wonderful. Well, shall we take, are you ready to go?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
there, you're good?
Oh, yeah.
I was going to take a vote. All right, go ahead. Floor is
do you
yours.
do you need something?
No,
Or-
I was
okay.
just going to say, if you were having set up time, I would have quickly voted on the Lehigh University agreement.
Go ahead.
Why don't we do that?
Please do that.
Please do that.
Wonderful.
All right.
Yes.
I thought you were having trouble, signing in or something.
Connected early, but
Oh, okay. Okay,
which
great.
is a sign of time.
All right. Well, then we'll
Signs
take
of
this.
my growth.
I do have under curriculum, student, and staff services. I have item 4B, external license agreement. We discussed this at length last time. We had a different agreement, and I just want to extend thanks to the administration, the high school, principals, assistant principals, vendors, central office administration for looking into an alternate date. And we now have on our agenda tonight a Southern Lehigh District graduation for May 30th. Which is a Friday, and it is before the last day of school, and it is for the agreement at Stabler Arena again. So could I have a motion to accept that agreement?
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. And a second from Ms. Cruz. So Mr. Wack, Ms. Cruz, motion and second. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Mond.
First of all, luckily this is meeting the Commonwealth criteria for a number of days and or hours. But secondly, I was asked as in the spirit of continuous improvement that next year we have an opportunity to maybe better plan that so that we don't have this issue and we can end the school year where we probably intended to. So that would be my comment. Thanks.
And my comment is that we need to book it now for next year and not delay. I agree with Mr. Maud.
Yeah, I don't know that the calendar is set to maybe do it now, but soon, right? Whenever that's possible.
Yeah, and if that necessitates voting on the school calendar earlier, I'm not sure that many people in the community would mind getting that earlier, but the administration, we need to hit those dates. But we can also look into setting a school calendar as early as possible so we can get on top of, just in general. I'm not asking for comments now, just from
No,
an
I just
agenda
said
setting perspective.
We work with the other Lehigh County districts to help coordinate our calendar with LCTI.
Mhm.
So we have to be a little careful getting the jump on that because we would end up possibly missing days at the LCTI. But I think toward the end of February is our normal
Yes.
goal. Is that right?
Yes.
For the end of February as we try to get that done. So we'll see if we can zip right in there once we have that information.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And now, Dr. Trinkle and Dr. Salmetto.
That's okay. I'm glad that one got out of the way. Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
So tonight we will delve into broad areas of our assessment outcomes and perhaps even uncover some trends for you. As we examine student outcomes and standardized assessments, we consider the diversity of talents among our students. We have artists, we have entrepreneurs, we have athletes, we have musicians, and so many more. And many are excelling. And for those who need more, we are able to reinforce and uplift them so that we can also see those and all students head for future of success. Regardless of a test score, which you'll see tonight, we support every single student for their needs in our schools. Our goal is clear, and that is to ensure that students either reach or exceed grade level standards when we're looking at this. We have a coordinated approach, and it's driven by a belief that every student can be successful. This takes focus, it takes commitment, and incredible partnerships between our students, teachers, and our families, and our teams have been nothing short of amazing. Our curriculum efforts are well underway, and while we have a firm focus on our content areas, we know that education is never final and reform is never quite complete. So we need to make sure our educators have the right materials, access to professional development, the time to do this work, and we are committed to all of those and more. Tonight, we will have a very broad overview and a deep dive into some of our data. I will first give you a general overview of the Future Ready Index, and that gives us a comparative view of our academic standing across the state. Our billing administrators will provide a deeper look into our data specific to each school. And Southern Lehigh School District, I want to couch it here, is that we are built on a foundation of achievement, family support, and rich knowledge. So it's a great, great place to start. We're proud of where we stand, and we continually are seeking innovative strategies to empower and engage our students even more. Just to set the stage, just a few reminders that we have several key indicators that we use for both state and local assessment measures. The most familiar you'll see will be obviously our PSSAs and our keystones. PSSA is grades 3 through 8 ELA mathematics, grades 4 and 8 science, although we are seeing a change to that next year, not this year, but next year, this year in grade 5. That is just your first look at grade 5 science, though. So that will be used to benchmark future assessments, which is why we won't see data tonight for that. So you will only see these content areas for PSSAs. Keystones, you will see grades 7 and 8 Algebra 1. We offer that in grades 7 and 8, and then by grade 10, our students are typically done with Algebra 1 or at least taking that assessment. We also have then biology and English for keystones. Those are offered. You can offer those twice a year. Here we do it annually, and we've seen pretty good test success as far as not needing a retake. We can always move to a 2-session assessment. We just have not seen the need to do that. We also use our local assessments, and you'll see a couple of them up there: STAR, Acadience, IXL. We can even use AP testing to capture student growth and achievement. These forms are done much more frequently than our PSSAs and our keystones. Keystones and PSSAs are a snapshot of student achievement at a very specific time. We can use that for change. We can use that to look at our instruction and make adjustments. And you'll see through tonight that achievement and growth is evident. But we will own areas of focus, and we will specifically and strategically focus our attention in the areas identified tonight. Just another reminder before we get started, we have assessments, which are our PSSAs and our keystones. Our data warehouse systems are our Future Ready Index, PVAS, and eMetric. So our students take the assessments, and that data gets funneled into these 3 systems for us to analyze the data. The Future Ready Index is like our school district report card. It's our forward-facing report card, providing that comprehensive, holistic view on student achievement. It integrates multiple measures of academic outcomes, on-track measures, and career readiness. PVAS, and you'll see that weaved in here tonight for a reason. It's helpful. It's a single data point, but it's extremely helpful. But when we're thinking about it, it cannot be used standalone. PVAS is student growth. It's reflection of where our students have grown from year to year. It looks at groupings of students, not single data comparisons. So it's different than what you're looking at as far as Future Ready Index. It helps us when we're looking back and what has been going on, and when looking forward to projections of achievement. These are projections, not predictions of student achievement. eMetric just gets us down into a little bit more of a data analysis. It can help us view individual performance, group performance, and even subgroup performance. So you're looking at the Future Ready Index as a general, PVAS a little bit deeper, eMetric even deeper. We use this as a general and a diagnostic approach to see how programming is working for all types of students in our schools. And we're constantly looking for academic gains or even lack of achievement. We do not want our students to lose ground academically. That's the purpose of this data analysis. Just to set some context here, as far as the Future Ready Index, you will see colors. Blue means all groups are exceeding the growth standard. Green is all student groups meet interim targets. And red is a student group did not meet the growth standard. And the red colors in general, but the red can look alarming. But the color indicators are important. And the bigger story, though, is how we're using our PVAS data and our local assessments like STAR, Acadience, and IXL to further analyze and look at our progress. The Future Ready Index is a academic 30,000-foot view on our student achievement. We are growing our students. Even though you might be seeing red, you can draw some conclusions. I challenge us to consider the same approach to either green or blue. You can draw a lot of conclusions very quickly by just looking at the colors. But I think you'll see tonight that we are growing our students academically. And it highlights the importance of tonight's presentation and sharing this information with you and our community to highlight the great work and remain informed. So I'm going to just give you the first picture. I certainly don't want to steal the thunder of our administrators who've done an amazing job looking at this information, and not in just preparation for tonight, but to do the everyday work in our schools. We begin with Hopewell, or just K-3, but Hopewell is first. They only test in ELA and math. There are no growth scores because it's the first time our students are being assessed with state standardized assessments. So you'll see the colors, but it just demonstrates progress towards that 2033 goal. This is not based on a cohort. This is a new student group. You cannot compare it necessarily to last year's. It's different students. You cannot see the growth, whole new set of kids. So you can see in ELA, the group, there's a group that did not meet the target growth, but in math, we exceeded it. But I want to highlight too, instead of getting into, deeper data, is that Hopewell had a 96% attendance rate, which we all know K-3, and you see a similar for Liberty Bell, that K-3 is crucial for student attendance. It's the foundational skills in math, reading, and social development, which is indicative of future academic success. So a 96% attendance rate is amazing. You'll see here, this is Hopewell's first glance at ELA and math. We are exceeding in both categories of the target goal for 2033. But I want to highlight too another 96% attendance rate. Again, showing a sense of belongingness in the school community. That is an amazing statistic. Yes, sorry. Liberty Bell. Sorry, that was Liberty Bell. That was Liberty Bell. Yes. I separated the slides this year.
Karen, can I say, what is the statewide average attendance rate in K-3?
Oh, I'd have to pull it up. I can get that for you. Yeah.
No rush. Can you ballpark it? I mean, are we above average?
I would say we are far above average. Yes. Yeah. We are in the blue in every, we are in the 90s, 96, 97% in almost every school. And I can tell you that is in the blue for almost all of in comparison to the state.
Dr. Trinkle, I don't want to insert another. How would you like us to? I know we all have. Thank you for sending this out early. That way we could kind of look at it and come up with questions. When would you like us to ask you the questions that we have?
Well, I think if possible, the end is always,
and then we can just refer back to slide whatever,
or we can break it down after K3, after 4, 6.
However you'd prefer. I just wanted either at the end or breakdown whenever you feel.
I think breaking it down by grade band might be helpful because we might get to some of your questions, and if not, that's fine too. But I think after, Dr. Chromiak and Mr. Mansfield go over K3, if there's questions, we can move on to GP if that works.
Right around like slide 23 or 25, something like that.
It's a big slide deck. Yes.
All right. No. So we'll hold the elementary questions until around slide whatever 20 something. And
I think
thanks.
Chapter 3. But I do think that might be helpful.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Dr. Mann would like there to be no questions at all.
It's going to be so comprehensive that you may not have any.
He wants to see Monday Night Football. Is that what it is?
So moving on to JPLIS, you'll see here that all of our content areas, ELA, math, and science, are either meeting the target or exceeding. And while this is really strong data, we continue to analyze this too and look for trends and look for ways that we can have increased student achievement. JPLS had almost a 93% attendance rate. Again, our students show up to school. They are also continuing to offer career exploration and exposure to career exploration at this level, at a high level as well. For our middle school, you'll see here just at a glance, ELA and science, we are meeting the growth standard, but for, I think that's biology, right? Mine is very small. The science, we're not meeting the math. The math, we didn't meet the target goal. So you'll see we are markedly above the statewide average though. And we too have a lot of questions about how they come up with the growth target to 2023. And about 2 years ago, they changed that overnight from 2030 to 2033 without telling us. And I think that was at the end of the 21-22 school year, midway through 22-23, they changed that to 2033. But when you ask for the metric about how they come up with your growth target, well, you carry the one, it's not as clear cut as we would like it to be, is how I'll say it. It's helpful for us, but it's not as clear cut as we would like it to be. Again, strong attendance from our middle school. And as we know, when students are engaged, they're regularly attending school. Again, career exploration and strong evidence for career development at this level. Again, using this global data to see how we can get future gains of achievement. Okay, the high school. You'll see here as well in ELA, we have our tested students demonstrated that we exceeded the growth. Last year, we did not have sufficient data to present. So this is a change from last year. We've exceeded the growth target for 2033. And in math and bio, although our students remain above the statewide average, we did not demonstrate growth based on that 2033 goal. Again, I want to intentionally reinforce that collectively and collaboratively, our students are regularly attending school in partnership with our families at home. And that is such a critical, important role for all of us to do together. Now, I've just given a very global, brief overview of the Future Ready Index. While it's helpful, we do not receive this timely. I think we received it at the end or the middle of last week to prepare this for you tonight. So I wish the turnaround time was a little bit more quick. I do believe another preview is coming out tomorrow for our Act 13 building scores. That has not yet been released, which is a delay in comparison to when we received it from last year. Before our building administration goes through their specific data, Dr. Solometa will provide a brief overview of the data collection and PVAS itself. Is that small enough for you? It's good. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Trinkle. So before we hand things over to our building principals to look at their building data specifically, I do want to take a moment and just highlight the difference between growth data and achievement data, because you are going to hear principals talk about both of those types of data. So what you see here on this first slide is achievement data. So achievement data would be a measure of how well students performed on a summative assessment. In other words, are they learning what we set out for them to learn in any given grade level? And so you can take the scores that they achieve on a test, and you can group those scores into low, average, high, or as PSSA and Keystone like to label them, below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. This is very valuable data because, of course, we want to see if what we're teaching and how we're teaching it is effective for individual students and for groups of students. For buildings like Liberty Bell and Hopewell, achievement data is really what you're going to hear about because that's what they have. Third grade is your first tested year. So achievement data is important to look at, but it doesn't tell the full picture. What we like to look at in addition to achievement data is growth data. And to see growth data, we use a data warehouse. The acronym is PVAS, which is Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System. And what that warehouse does is it takes the achievement data of individual students as well as cohorts of students. It plugs it, chugs it, and pops out some growth information so that we can see how cohorts of students are doing from year to year and whether or not that cohort is meeting its growth expectation or exceeding it or falling behind. So essentially it's taking the performance of those students this year on the test that they took, and they're comparing it to a composite of how those students performed on all of their previous achievement tests, PSSA and Keystone. And they see whether or not those students have made their goal. Now, when you start to see some colors, Dr. Trinkle talked about colors, right? And how they are important. And for all intents and purposes, they make this data a lot more, I think, easy to consume and understand. But you have to understand what you're looking at. So when you see PVAS data and you see dots that are in the blue, that's great. That means that that cohort of students exceeded their achievement goals for that testing year. When you see that you have PVAS data in the green, it means that those students held steady, that they met their achievement goal. Red is always a little bit alarming to see. That just means that those students didn't make that achievement goal. Now, let's keep in mind when you have a high performing group of students like we have, sometimes that can be much, much harder to do. And so at face value, it's very easy to form conclusions, but a deeper dive will give you much more information. And that's what we at the district level, and that's what our building principals and our teachers do quite often is look at the data, take it for what it's worth on face value, but then take a deeper dive and really look at how groups of students are doing, really look at how individual students are doing, and use that to help make programmatic decisions. So just a nice Venn diagram to compare the two. While achievement and growth data are interrelated. They are different. So keep that in mind when you hear our principals talking about the data at their building level. You keep in mind that we want to pay attention to both when we're trying to get that complete picture of how our students are doing and what we can do in the future to make improvements for them and make sure our students have the very best educational experience. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Dr. Chromiak and Mr. Mansfield to talk about our K-3 buildings data.
Good evening. Okay, sorry. I can see. Sorry, I have good eyes.
I should have taken that vote now.
All right, good evening. So our first slide just kind of gives you an overview and the breakdown, which you'll see in color on the next couple of slides, of our overall PSSA achievement data. In ELA, our school was 69.1% proficient or above, and in math, we were 78.4. So looking across the years, we did take a little dip from last year in ELA. When we break down our e-metric data, so we look at student by student by student, there were really no surprises, so to speak. There was maybe a handful of kids that did not meet proficiency that were expected to. But other than that, most of our kids performed exactly kind of how we had expected based on all of our other measures, Acadience and STAR. So we were projected to perform a couple percentage points higher in ELA. However, in math, we were projected to perform lower than what we did. So again, nothing too alarming, higher or lower for each of our students. Our math score is, I wouldn't say significantly higher, but it's definitely higher in the reading. And really what that comes down to is some of our kiddos who have accommodations can have their math PSSA read aloud to them. So unfortunately, if you are a kid who cannot read or you have a disability or something like that, you cannot have anything read to you in the area of reading. However, in math, you may have an accommodation that you can have that read to you. So you'll see that our math scores do look a little bit higher than our ELA scores because of that. That's you.
Okay, and at Liberty Bell, you can see our percentage above or proficient in ELA is 83.2 and math at 79.6. And again, looking across the last 4 years, we're pretty much in the same ballpark as where we've been when you look at the green and blue strands, and I sort of add those together. And then again in math as well, we're pretty much feeling like we're staying steady in our instruction and, seeing those things. The challenge, again, as Dr. Trinkle and Dr. Solomito said, taking, really high achieving kids and trying to continue and maintain that. So this is what we were anticipating right around these marks, and we were able to hit them. So for us as a K-3 team moving forward, we have very similar action steps to what we've been taking. We've had a big transition in our foundations, and then of course the tier 1 wit and wisdom. Again, PD to support math fluency and number sense is ongoing. Just last week, we did some coaching with that. And just regular data meetings, MTSS meetings, and those other things that we're meeting with teachers just to meet the broad range of needs that we're seeing in K-3, which is rapidly changing. So that's what we're seeing. Any questions for us?
I have a question. Thank you very much. Can you help me understand the difference between the two buildings in scores that we're seeing? I feel like I've seen that now for a few years. So can you just help me understand potentially why we may be seeing a difference? I know that may be a tough question, but
I don't think it's a tough question. I think, I'll take a crack at it first. I think if you look at the student populations in both schools, they're different. The needs are different. Needs are higher in Hopewell from that perspective, as far as specially designed instruction and needs for each individualized student, which will impact student outcomes and achievement. That's where Dr. Chromiak was saying we were expecting this. Now, there are areas of growth. There's curricular initiatives. There's tiered interventions that we are continuing to provide for all of our students. But when we're doing the MTSS levels of support, those are the exact students that we're focusing on and increasing those efforts, not just in ELA, but every content area. But in particular, that would be, I think, if we were to drill down to specifics, I think that might be an indicator. Not the only one. Sometimes different students, different group of students, they're going to test differently than last year's. So it's hard to do a comparison, like a straight comparison from last year to this year, because it's different kids.
Are we seeing more students potentially over the past couple years with higher needs?
Yes.
We have.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yes, we are. And not just K to 3. We are seeing that not just at enrollment through early intervention, but we're seeing that from, students and families moving into the school district with supports that we must either assess and provide or an increased level of support based on our own analysis. So yes, we are seeing an uptick in those needs. That is an absolute.
Do you have any data on the needs that when children start in kindergarten? Are they having these needs when they're starting in kindergarten, or are these needs that are developing in second, third grade, where there's potentially more instruction?
Both.
You're seeing both.
We do historically, and this is to the credit of our school district and Andrea Bookman and her team for doing early intervention and reaching out to those families who receive supports that way. And we are getting a lot of information through the early intervention, but we are also seeing our evaluations throughout, matriculation to first to second to third, that there are needs through our evaluations. And they're not singular needs sometimes. So we are seeing an increase in that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And just one other quick question. Is Spanish immersion playing a role as well?
Well, Spanish immersion does take the PSSAs in third grade so that those scores are looped into Liberty Bell.
Do those scores seem to be higher or lower for those students?
It depends again on the year. Typically, those students are pretty high achieving, but they do also span the range of advanced, proficient, and basic. So we have a little bit of needs in all three. And again, we're seeing increased challenges there too.
Thank you very much. Appreciate what you guys do.
Yep.
I had a couple.
You don't have to raise your hand.
Oh, I do, because I'm short. I'm used to being like right here, Mr. Mansfield. No, thanks. And you're right. You answered a lot of my questions I had going in. If we're looking at, for example, and thank you for the explanation of math is able to be read to students. So when you're looking at, an early language learners who might need that processing, thank you for that explanation. That helped a lot. If we look at, for example, I guess I'm wondering, and kind of dovetailing off the questions I've already heard, why has student growth, what it is about the population, and I'm just going to pick on Hopewell because it's an easy band to look at, why has that, in general, stagnated or reduced? Why has that growth aspect? If you look at 22-23, below basic is 0%.
Zero.
Sorry, I need to keep pressing in my mic. I realize this. So if you look at 22-23, below basic for ELA is 0%, but in 23-24, below basic is 7.2. And I realize these are different cohorts of students. I understand that. However, in general, they are different cohorts of students, but if I look at the preceding years in ELA, it was kind of the same, and then you kind of see this jump. And I understand cohorts, but is there we were mentioning students with higher needs. So is there a correlation? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'll just let you answer the question. Why do you think that difference between that growth between 23-24 has any theories?
Just overall, if you look at the past 4 years, our advanced ranges and proficient are similar-ish.
Yeah.
It definitely has to do with our cohort of students. Again, we only test one group, so we can really drill down to student by student and exactly how they're performing. So I can tell you right now, next year when I'm up here, I'm going to be in a better spot than this year, just based off of how our incoming third grade students are already performing at the beginning of the year. So truly has
Okay. Just
to do with
your
our
theories.
kids,
And is the
our groups of kids that
Yeah.
have,
Sure.
specific learning
Needs.
disabilities, other disabilities that factor into that. Tier 3 kids who are not yet on grade level, but they're close, but they're not able to be proficient.
Mhm.
We can look at kid by kid and say, yep,
Sure.
that's
Is there
where we expected.
is there a demographic data point? Not, I mean, you as educators can drill down kid by kid to help each other kid on an individualized basis, but is there a demographic data point? Like, did our percentage, it would probably be helpful for us in this process, in the presentation, even for comparison for next year, it would be helpful to know like what percentage of kids have those kind of interventions this year versus a prior cohort. It would be helpful. Any demographic data you have to
Like our
kind of
breakdown of special ed population.
breakdown of special ed,
versus
any
tiered-
breakdown, exactly, any
Sure.
breakdown, and whether that is, whatever demographic data you think would help explain this. I know
Sure.
sometimes when we report, we were just talking about PIMS in another committee meeting, like PIMS of the state, you break down, discipline according to different groups of students, and it might help explain. And you break down test scores according to different groups or interventions.
Yep,
that
I
would
can get
that would
that to
be
you. Yeah,
that'd be
I think
great.
we were at about 14 or 15% special ed population, and then our tier 3 was high-ish.
Yeah.
So I can get that to you.
And I would just and then also, how can we as a board help positively influence that support or growth to get at those? Because these kids are going to be with us starting in third
Sure.
grade. So what is, either it's a part of the strategic plan, or if it's a matter of, smaller group sizes for instruction, or what? I mean, I don't expect you to answer this now. If you
Yeah.
can, great.
I mean, the good news is that all of our kids did grow. So, although they were not proficient or advanced, they all grew.
Mhm.
And we look at that through our Acadians and STAR, and we do see growth in all of our students. It's hard to grow from here to proficient, but if they're growing here to here, and that is,
Right. And this is the first snapshot we see, and where they
Correct.
started, and this is
Right.
not, as Dr. Salametto was explaining, a growth metric.
Right.
This is just,
Right.
No, thanks. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I have a question that'll probably be repeated across. Is there a situation where we have significant amounts of families who are opting out of PSSAs or Keystones that may affect these, or is it really
We had
a non-issue?
2 opt-outs last year.
Okay, so it's not
Yeah.
substantial. Okay, thank you.
All right. My question. So the piece that you both had mentioned and made facial expressions on were the increase in needs. So in regards to that and looking at the data on there, is there specifics regarding to the increase in needs and identifying what areas those needs specifically are? Because multiple kids have different, but there's a lot of overlap. Is there a specific area in an increase in needs that potentially is why we potentially see this? And trying to drill down to the point where, from a school district support, is there an area from a support mechanism for certain needs that maybe we need to increase on?
Well, I mean, there are. I don't know that we're going to get it through PSSA data, right? But
Yeah, I think this is
certainly we
one-
can work on identifying that.
This is like one data point.
Right.
That's a starting point for us when we're looking at either autistic support or emotional support or those types of things that we are certainly capable of handling and providing support and intervention for to a certain level. And I think that's all part of the internal discussions we're having about how best to respond to those student needs, not just academically, but overall. And Dr. Wack, I did look up the general attendance. It's 78% is the statewide average. So we are in the 90s, above mid 90s in almost every school.
Great, thanks.
I also think it's important too. I mean, in a K-3 world, we're really measuring success well beyond like what we're seeing in math and reading scores. Like, yes, they're important and we look at them and we have team meetings and we talk about them, but we're talking about kids that are very young and some of whom have never been in school before and really have no idea what we're doing. And like walk through the doors, like, what are you talking about? I have to listen to you. So just in measuring those successes that we see in the hallway every day and in the classroom says, oh my gosh, this kid, listen this time, or he's making friends for the first time, or they're listening, they sat with someone new at lunch. Like things like that are measuring sticks for us too, that are beyond what we can encapsulate in this PowerPoint. And again, these are important. We look at them, we have conversations, but we're talking about the babies of the school district, right? Like really the babies.
What the disparity between Liberty Bell and Hopewell? Is that, can you provide an explanation or how we're going to address that as a district in general? Or
Yeah,
what is
I
the
think,
disparity?
again, it's sort of the population that you see and just the differences as, Dr. Cormack said, next year she anticipates her scores bouncing. Next year, you'll be asking me that question, why mine have drops probably if
Okay.
I'm looking at the data the way
Okay.
I'm looking at it now and the year after that. So I just think I think it's hard in a district this small. And I think parents do it and we do it sometimes and our teachers do it, that Hopewell and Liberty Bell are the same school, and they're really not. They are different dynamics. There's different, things to consider, and that's just the groups we have. So like we will often talk about her group, and I'm like, oh, my second grade's not like that. My first grade's like that, or
Okay.
whatever the difference is.
And speaking of next year, when I know that PSSA is next year, I believe, is the implementation
No.
for computer-based.
2026.
Oh, so not next year, the following year? Okay. So as a part of that, I'm sure that there will be some sort of, but preparing for that and looking at, we're going to see dips in that as well. We're going to see a different, potentially, when students have to interface with that technology.
That'll
so
be
I'm
really
sure.
interesting to see.
Yeah.
That's a conversation we're already beginning to have. Do we have the right technology to even do that right now? What does that look like on an iPad, and how do we make that adjustment for our third graders? And how
Right.
do we allow them to practice that before it comes to April? And we're like, well, here you go, start typing. Again, we have the babies. Like
Mhm.
they're going to look at a keyboard and go, what is this? Right. So forget what their math score is. They don't even know what a keyboard is. So
But at least there
those
will
are
be the same
conversations we've
across the
already
board.
begun to have with Dr. Mahan, Dr. Trinkle.
Yeah, I think, we've started having those conversations like as early as July and August internally in preparation. The state has actually provided a free resource. It's called Firefly. We've been, which actually looks like a assessment measure that a student could take. That doesn't solve the typing.
At the same time, we don't
request.
want, I am no
Right.
way suggesting that we
Right.
should start our students now and
No.
figuring out how to take a test
But
on an
we-
iPad. Like I would throw
we
the whole
are
thing out
inter-
if I could personally. I just want to go on record as saying I am not saying y'all should get on the stick about figuring out how these no, let's not.
But
I'm
there's
just,
a reality. It's
it's a
coming,
reality
and
of what's
we have
coming.
to address it and look
And
at
we
it.
are
Yeah.
internally trying to figure out the best approach for all of that, given that mandate.
Right. Your mic. Nobody can hear unless you want
No, and I would just say the state and Apple are at odds themselves over how to make this work.
It's another
It's a
thing
two-factor.
Mhm.
that we will have to adjust, which we will do, and we will do well.
I read about that.
Thanks. And was Wit and Wisdom implemented at some point here?
Wit and Wisdom was implemented at the beginning of last school year. So it does, I don't know how much impact we can read into that. I think next year's scores might help us in year
Okay.
2 as we see our teachers feeling more comfortable with it this year. And again, just anecdotally having conversations with teachers like, hey, I now get how this lesson sets it up for the next lesson, where you don't have the opportunity to know that when you're doing it the first time. So, we're seeing that even kids get it and now understand, right? And, last year, third graders are like, what do you want us to do? And now now the third graders are like, yep, we did that last year. We're ready to go. So the third grade teachers are like, wow, they get it so much quicker. So we're seeing that across the board also, which is very, very typical.
Thanks. There's no blip indicating, which is also a good sign. Thanks so much.
Just quickly on these bar graphs, what are the sample sizes for each school? How
So
many people?
It says it there on the corner. It's really
So
hard
you
to
were
read.
113. I was 97.
Yeah. So Hopewell went from 106 to 97, and Liberty Bell went from 114 to 113. We got smaller.
Sure, we have a big
This year,
when
our
you
third
start
graders.
looking at 7, let's just
Yeah.
say the below basic at 7.2,
Mhm.
that's 7 people
Right.
total, students total.
Yep.
So
And then this year we have very large numbers in third grade. So next year that will skyrocket up and could potentially throw that off because we're in the 130s this year. It's our bubble years.
And this is just based on the third grade data, right?
Only third
Just only
grade.
third grade.
Yep.
I just want to remind everyone that these kids during COVID were, right, preschool, kindergarten,
Preschool.
first grade, and
Yes.
had them out of school for some bit of time. We had masks
Yes.
on them and stuff like that. So some of this may be expected.
You know, one quick comparison point, having had these kind of discussions over the years, in my previous district, we had 5 elementary schools within the same school district. And even in a building, you can have 2 third grades with a different makeup in each class, depending on the students and needs within the classroom. So it's not unusual to see something like this. And I think the explanation makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the good news is, if you look at, like Dr. Wag was saying, we did, but I just kudos to our staff and teachers, because if you look at that data from the years immediately following that pandemic bounce back, as you were, our numbers are really holding steady. There was like Dr. Kromiak was talking about, our kids were growing and learning, and so I would have almost expected to see a worse outcome or that kind of a dip or a blip between third grades that Dr. Wag was talking about. And I mean, it's really not significant. As Stephen was saying, it's like, what, 5 to 7 kids in a different sample
Right.
size, in a different
Right.
class, in a different day.
And it could be like when you drill it down really closely, you could have 3 kids that missed it by 1 question.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, I can show you, I taught 3rd grade for 20 years into the PSSA, and they don't even know what to do with it. Like, we're practicing how to fill in a bubble. You could see my scores from year to year as a teacher, and it would almost be like some years was a different person was in that classroom that year. It's just that makeup of that class and who they become as a personality. Because again, they are so young, who they just become. Like, they just might be more afraid of taking a test, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
That's exactly why I wanted you to clarify and quantify
Right.
numbers with percentages, because it's not clear unless you really put it in context.
Yeah.
I'm just going to get this out now and thank all our principals and your teachers for what you are doing to recognize where our students are at. K through 3 is critical, because we know 3rd grade, learning to read to get you to reading to learn. So 3rd grade is critical. This is one data point. Dr. Kromiak and Mr. Mansfield have mentioned it, and Mr. Pepe just mentioned it's not alarming to see the differences between schools. So I think as a board, we might see that red, and we're all concerned, as we should be. But I think what we're all saying is, don't be afraid to tell us what you need. And we understand it's one data point, and I'm 100% confident you're doing things in your buildings between September and March when that PSSA happens. This is just one data point. So it's all those other things that you're doing that you didn't share, you can't share in this chart. In order to teach you, I must know you, and you're looking at those things. So I'm just giving a big thank you to everyone. So I don't have to say it every time, and just recognizing it's one data point.
Thank you. Any other? Very good statement. I concur. Any other questions for K3? If not, I will bring Mr. McGinty. Thank you, Dr. Kromiak, Mr. Mansfield, Mr. McGinty, also known as the governor.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'll start off with the first screen that was shared with you. Same story here. Green is good, blue is better. 1 green and 2 blue is right about where we want to be as far as achievement is concerned. The rest of the slides that I have to share will show you achievement back as far as, I believe, 2018. And then a growth chart after the overall PVOS growth that we show. The scatter plots might be a little bit hard to see, and I'll walk through those, but I think in lieu of the data that will come out potentially tomorrow, it's a pretty good example of our achievement matched with growth, and then matched against the other 500 districts in Pennsylvania. So here's our value add report. As you can see, grade level by grade level, we have a lot of really extraordinary growth, well above, and some where we need some work, and some meeting. Overall, and that's across all grades. So you see the 4th row there with the color code. What you're going to see is that across all grades, we had significant evidence that we met the growth standard. Then we had evidence that we met the growth standard in both math and ELA, respectively. And of course, in our science, we still continue to show outstanding achievement and outstanding growth. So here's our sixth grade, and at the bottom I have this year's data. What you're seeing there is a steady increase year to year, going all the way back to our 17 data. We've not seen a high since then, but we're really close to the following year. In fact, it's the highest percentage of advanced we've seen since 2017, and it's also really good year-to-year growth. The next chart then is the matching of this achievement data to the growth data that you saw for sixth grade. So in sixth grade, we met the growth standard, which is why you see that orange looking star, so not the purple dot right there on the y-axis. So I like these because they're going to compare us to other achievement across the state and other growth across the state. And when I look at these, I like to look at who is as high along the y-axis and who is as far right along the y-axis as we are. And what you'll see there, if you count purple dots like I did, there's about 22. So about 22 districts statewide are matching achievement and growth the way our sixth grade math does. So I thought that was pretty good. And another great thing about these charts is it shows you an achievement maximum. And interestingly, the achievement maximum here is 84. That is not a traditional public school. The actual maximum for a traditional public school was 81. So our achievement was 67.3. 81 was the best anyone could do in sixth grade math last year. The next data set is our sixth grade ELA. Interestingly, sixth grade ELA came along the journey early with us and took the entire assessment online, which with what I believe are great results, although they're showing growth was not great on our PVAS report. I have to admit that 80.1 is, again, a steady year-to-year growth, which is great, but also I think when you look at the scatter plot and you see that we're on the wrong side as far as growth is concerned, it's still not hard to notice that there are very few dots above us. And the maximum dot 97, again, a non-traditional public school with entry criteria. 89 actually was the max, and our score was 80. So really strong achievement, looking to get stronger growth. But again, looking at the scatter plot, who is achieving as high and is as far right, even though we're on the left-hand side there, I counted 19. So 19 schools in the state can match achievement and growth in that way. Fifth grade math, strong scores again, strong year-to-year growth, looking back across all of the years that we have there, pretty good year-to-year gain. And again, with our scatter plot, when we match our growth and achievement, not on the side of that axis that we want to be, but again, we're talking about as many as 32 purple dots that are as high in achievement and growth as we are in fifth grade math. This is an interesting set of data, I think, for fifth grade ELA. And also something else to mention about ELA in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade is this was an implementation year for Wit and Wisdom. So looking like we had a dip there, which is interesting to see in a year-to-year way, not far off from how we generally do. The very interesting thing about fifth grade ELA can be seen on the scatter plot. So in a way, looking at it in a year-to-year comparison, you might not feel as good about it as you do on a comparison that shows both growth and achievement. And the number of purple dots that I could count that were as high and as far right as we were are exactly 2. With a maximum score of 88, our pass rate was 73. I thought we did extremely well in fifth grade ELA when we're matching our growth and our achievement. So our fourth grade science, we usually crush it. We did again this year. Interestingly, looking at the scatter plot, you're going to see that lots of other school districts crushed it. We're on the right side of the axis. There are a lot more purple dots there than I could count, but I tried anyway, and I got 50. The max score for this test, and this is the only max score for any test that I've seen, is 100. So there was a district that did score perfect for their fourth grade in science. Okay, fourth grade mathematics. This one I could stare at for hours. I could go back to 2017 in the growth data that you would find in PVAS. You will not see a single year where we did not see exceeding growth for our fourth grade math. Our growth has been great. Our achievement has been great. Again, I could stare at this data forever. There are 3 purple dots as high and to the right as we are in 4th grade math. And year to year, it's over and over again. Max score of 90.5, and that was a traditional public school. 4th grade ELA, again, implementation year for Wit and Wisdom. I thought our achievement was good. We're seeing somewhat close to or comparable achievement. And if there was a grade where our transition would have been most difficult, it would have been our youngest learners in the building for 4th grade ELA. Let me go back one. And there is our growth and achievement. We're on the right side of the axis there as far as growth is concerned. I counted 28 purple dots, so 28 districts in the state of Pennsylvania that can match achievement and growth the way we have in 4th grade ELA. Just finally, our actionable steps. Our MTSS program is fairly robust. We are currently running interventions across the day. We have been able to utilize Title I funds for an additional aid to support our intervention groups. We're looking at data as often and as much as we can. Some of it we like to look and admire, and other we're just looking for ways to improve. Still have a child study team approach, student assistance program to support our learners across the board. Well, that is all my data for 4th through 6th grade. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Sean.
I'll go ahead. The beard is in a transitional phase. It will look better as the weeks go on.
I just want to say thank you for the scatter plots. The scatter plots were really helpful to understand how we're comparing to other districts.
yeah.
So that was very helpful.
I wanted to ask about when you look at the graphs and you take the y-axis to the x and you're looking at growth, which one is really more important? Because it depends on the level that the individual or the student is and how much they can possibly grow. So if you're to think of mathematically an asymptote, it never will reach, you have a law of diminishing returns. I'm just asking if this
I couldn't agree more. It's hard to hang your head if you're a kid that scored in the 99th percentile and the following year you scored in the 90th.
Right. So I thought that would be an interesting thing for you to highlight and convey to the people listening.
No, absolutely. When you look at our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and they break, PBOS will break them into groups or quintiles, so 20% at the highest 20%, you see about 95 of our students. So almost half of our students achieving in the highest quintile, meaning we're starting at the 80th percentile. We're achieving better than 80% of the students taking the assessment. If you're not going up, and you can go from 90 to 80, it's going to give you a negative growth score, PBOS will. And PBOS will warn you not to look at individual student growth, but individual students make up the herd that they're measuring growth for. So it does come down to that.
If you have a cohort of high achievers, that number is going to be significantly affected. And I think it's important for people to understand the differences and why you need to be careful when you look at that.
Great.
I'll offer on that.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I'll offer on that point that the state is not flawless in its assessments. And one of the things that would account for that is an exam that has sufficient stretch, in that in order for our view that our upper level kids can't grow enough, there's an assumption that the exam itself cannot measure that level of growth. However, if you do have an exam with sufficient stretch, then you can actually measure that growth. And the mathematical model that is used, not to go, but the difference if you're in a race 1 year to the next of 100 kids, of going from like 11th to 3rd, that interval is more significant growth than if you're going from, say, 48th to 54 there, because of the movement in the middle as opposed to moving at the tail. So I would not want to simply say because our kids are doing well, we should not expect growth. We do expect growth, but there are also some legitimate measures. Like, for instance, you saw the science test. That test, in my glancing at, does not have sufficient stretch to measure value-added growth. whereas
Yeah,
some
that
others-
graph is biased. If you were to look at the statistical bell
Exa-
curve,
exactly.
it would be
You're right, exactly.
shifted inappropriately for
And we
analyzing.
wouldn't, right, we wouldn't necessarily expect a bell curve because the idea is that our treatment is moving people away from the bell curve. But I agree with everything that was said, but I will offer the note always that no matter where our kids are, we expect growth from them.
Thank you, Mr. McGinty.
Okay, all right.
Mrs. Webb, for grades 7 and 8.
Yep. Thank you. So in 7th and 8th grade, we do a whole smattering of tests. And I know I've spoken to you about this before, but all of our students are tested multiple times. So we have 7th and 8th grade PSSAs for ELA and math. We have 8th grade PSSA for science, and we have the Keystone in 7th and 8th grade. So I think we may be the most tested in the district. But before we start, I wanted to celebrate some things. So you can see on here that our career standards benchmark is 98%. We're in the high blue there. So our students are meeting those career standards with an exceedingly high number every year. In addition, we have 61 8th grade students being inducted into National Honor Society, Junior Honor Society this year. Those students have achieved above a 3.8 GPA and completed community service hours. That's about 25% of all of our 8th graders. We also had 81% of all middle school students achieving honor roll this last marking period. So that's scoring above a 3.25 unweighted GPA because none of the courses at the middle school are weighted. So those are some great celebrations. And you're all invited to our NJHS induction Thursday night if you feel like coming out. Okay, as we talk about the normal curve, I think it's important to note that the numbers from PVAS are normal curve equivalents, not percentiles. So I included them on my graphs on the next page or the next few slides so you could see where we fall. And that red line is right about the 65th normal curve equivalent, which if you look, and it's hard to point on here, but if you look to where it equates to percentiles, we're looking at the 80th percentile. So if you've got 100 kids in a room, we're outperforming 80 of them in most of these subject areas when you're hitting that 65th normal curve equivalent. And that's the number that's seen under achievement on the right side of this chart. So this is our PVAS growth scores. You notice a little bit of bouncing back and forth. So 7th grade in, let me change my page here so I'm on the right one. 7th grade in math did not have high growth. However, if you look at their achievement scores, those are some of the highest that we have. 64 as a starting achievement in the NCE, and then ending at the 62.5. 8th grade bounced back and did have high achievement. They started a little bit lower, 61.8, and jumped to 63.1. So across grade levels, we've met the standard for growth. In ELA, it's almost the exact opposite. We had great growth in ELA in 7th grade, but then not as high of growth in 8th grade for the ELA, but overall we met the growth. We are excited to see the future outcomes of this because we've just implemented Study Sync. This is year 1 for the Study Sync curriculum. Science is well above. We had very high achievement in science and then also in Keystone Algebra. Okay. For the cohort tracking, this is always interesting because it follows the same group of students across the years. So you'll notice in 5th grade, our students were in math. This is last year's 8th graders, so current 9th graders. 5th grade, they were well above in math. Then they took a dip and then they continued to grow. And you can see that the number of students seemed to drop from 7th and 8th grade in terms of taking those assessments. So the cohort went from about 223 to 204. And then in ELA, they were high in 5th and 6th grade and then took a dip in 8th grade. One thing I'd like to point out about the 8th grade ELA at the middle school is that in 7th grade, students have 90 minutes of ELA instruction at the middle school. They have an academic literacy course and an English language arts course. In 8th grade, they begin getting introduced to a world language. So they only get 45 minutes of ELA instruction, and then they have a world language that begins in that time frame. So there's significantly less instruction in 8th grade in ELA. But you can also see some interesting numbers there, and I actually reached out to the state to question them because in most of these achievement scores, you'll note that the end score is, let's say, 59.6.
they expect a small summer slide. And so the starting score for the next year is slightly lower, 59.1 in the NCE. I'm just looking at, let's say, 5th to 6th grade ELA. However, when you look at the end of 7th grade, it's 60.3, and then it jumps. They actually expected them to grow, apparently, over the summer to 62.8. And that's where we saw the biggest dip. You can also see that the student count dropped significantly there too. We had 20 less students taking the test. So I'm not sure exactly where the state came up with those numbers. They haven't gotten back to me yet. It could be a change in the number of students that took it and their estimated growth. But our ending achievement was very close to where we ended the year before, and we met the green standard there. So it's a little bit confusing. In science, our students always do really, really well, just like the IS. We were in the blue for our science, taking that cohort growth. 7th grade cohort had some interesting things happen there. They were below in ELA in 5th grade, bounced up in 6th, and then were below again in 7th. But again, if you look at those numbers of achievement, they're very, very high, 64.8, 64, 62. We are still about that 80th percentile, and we added 10 more kids in 7th grade. And then in language arts, almost the exact opposite. They started high, dropped in 6th grade, and then jumped a bunch in 7th grade. So we're seeing some interesting things happen. It's also interesting that they have different numbers of student counts for those tests, even though it's the same group of kids that took them. So they have them off by a couple each year, and I'm not sure where those discrepancies come from at the state level either. Yes, I'm sure they'll get right back to me. For the Future Ready Index, as far as advanced, we always outpace the state in our students achieving the advanced scores. This one is interesting to me, especially in math, because I do not think this takes into account our Keystone scores. It's only the PSSA scores. And we have about 100 kids every year taking the Keystone as one of our advanced math classes. So in English language arts, you can see that we are overall achieving in green for both growth and achievement. Our standards are continuing to improve. We also expanded our supports this year for struggling learners. So we have students participating in intervention groups now in 7th and 8th grade, and they are continuing to make that growth. In the 7th grade achievement, the red line signifies, and you have to almost work backwards, the red line signifies where the state average would be, the green would end. Okay, so the state average for proficient and advanced is 53.9% on the 7th grade PSSA. Our students and our building average was 80% proficient or advanced. So we significantly outpaced the state and even showed some improvement from last year. There we go. For 8th grade ELA, again, the state average is 53.9, and ours was 73.4% proficient or advanced. So this is the achievement, not the growth. And we are staying very close to where we have been in the past. Slightly different groups. This is not cohorted. So you can see that this group that was tested last year had a higher amount of students in the proficient range and slightly lower group in the advanced range. But otherwise, our numbers are very, very close. I also did some scatter plots for you. So mine are a little bit smaller. In 7th grade, we're exactly where we want to be, far right and high upper right part of that quadrant. I didn't count the purple dots like Sean did, but you can kind of see where we are there. 8th grade, high achievement. And as we saw in the earlier slides, not as much growth. Yes, I know. I did look up the one that was above us for science and saw that that was a gifted-only school focused on science and STEAM. So in some of those areas, we're competing against an unfair counterpart. Here's our math achievement. So our growth in our, our growth was green. Our achievement was red. We are offering a Title I, which is intervention math supports, to about 90 students. It's around 45 in 7th grade and 45 in 8th grade. These students fall between the 40th and 25th percentile. So they're kind of right on the cusp of being bumped up, but not at the bottom, where most of those students are already receiving interventions in the form of special education services. So our students falling below that 25th percentile. And I mapped our scores out on the achievement as well on here. So you can see state average is 40%, proficient or advanced. Ours is 54.4%. We've reduced our number in the below basic category and expanded our basic category. The others have stayed relatively the same with small changes in each one. And then in 8th grade, our achievement is the state average is 40%, ours is 48%, and almost identical to the year before, give or take maybe one child in each section. However, this is where it starts getting tricky. When we look at the Keystone Algebra, because we offer an accelerated and a hyper-accelerated pathway, we had 97 students in 7th and 8th grade take this Keystone exam, and 97.9% achieved proficient or advanced. So that is excellent for us at the middle school. I don't know how much it helps Mr. Miller at the high school because these students have now met that standard and are no longer taking it and are taking the more advanced classes at the high school. So the students he has taking the Keystone are typically students that are struggling more in math. But I also am not certain, and I included this in my question to the state, how these students' numbers feed into our PSSA numbers, because these students are taking both tests or potentially opting out of the 7th and 8th grade PSSA because this test is a graduation requirement and those don't impact them. So that could account for part of our numbers dropping from year to year too. And then our PVAS scatter plots for math, you can see on here that in 7th grade, we are very high in achievement, but on the wrong side of the growth line. In 8th grade, we're high for achievement and growth. We're on the right-hand upper quadrant. And in the algebra, we are again on the upper right-hand quadrant with very few scoring above us. And then science, I flipped too fast. We are in green for achievement and blue for growth. We always do very well in science. We are looking forward to the STEELS standards implementation next year, which will pose some challenges as we adopt that, but teachers are excited about the prospects. And teachers are working on receiving PD this year to prepare for that. In terms of our achievement on science, the state average is 59% proficient or advanced, and we well outpace that with an achievement of almost 80% proficient or advanced in science. And again, upper right-hand quadrant for the growth and achievement in science on our scatter plot. So those are only snapshots of moments in time. We look daily at our IXL growth and other factors. So you can see on here the skills mastered are skills that students have achieved a 100% on. The skills proficient, they've received above an 80% on. Most of this is done during the school day, and it's targeted. Typically, students get one assignment for IXL each subject per week that is tied to the current curriculum in the class. And then they also receive one from their recommendation wall, which is individualized to that specific student and areas that they might need growth on. So typically you'll see 2 ELA and 2 math IXLs assigned each week that they work on with the support of teachers in class. And that's how we kind of break it down for them. We see growth in that. We are doing our marking period 2 IXLs this week, as well as our marking period 2 star scores, but we can see our students constantly growing by looking at the numbers we get from them on a daily basis because they're constantly updated, which is one of the reasons we like the IXL. So to break that down a little bit more, I want to profile a student. So every student in the building has this data available to their team of teachers. It shows their spring IXL score from last year, their PSSA score from this current year, this past year with their TDA, their Lexile, and then their marking period 1 star scores. As we get more, we update them. This particular student, we've named her Bella, was a student who was kind of right on the cusp of missing advanced in the PSSA. But we noticed that in her star score, when she started this year, she was advanced. So she just missed it last year, and her IXL score was high. In 7th grade, she scored an 850, which means that she's equating her skills in ELA are equated to a mid-year 8th grader. So when we looked at the student and talked to her about their interests and the family, we talked to the family and looked at teacher recommendations. We actually moved this student up to the honors ELA for 8th grade to try and continue to extend them. So teachers look at the student-specific data and find areas of improvement, which you can see targeted here in red, as well as areas that are strengths, and we focus on those as we try to build her skill set. So this is data right from the PSSA and how she did last year. It matches the IXL data that we get for students as well. So you can see that she's very strong in grammar and mechanics and writing strategies, but some of the areas that she needs to grow in and that our teachers are focusing on are the reading strategies, and that ties into the notes from the last score where it was looking at, let's see here, the knowledge of language and the craft and structure of the things that she's reading. And then finally, we use PVAS to predict student performance. And when we look at this student scores, excuse me, you can see that she is expected to perform proficient in all of the subject areas moving forward, including Keystones at the high school. However, she also has a strong chance of performing advanced, excuse me, in ELA. And because that's an interest area, that's an area we chose to help grow her and try and bump her up from that proficient level to advanced. Okay. So that was a lot, but any questions?
Just a comment. I really appreciate that you included other things besides the Keystone and PSSA and PBOS, because as a teacher in a classroom, the other things that you talked about, the IXL, the STAR, those are the kinds of things that on the ground level, those are the things that give us immediate information to help out students. So I appreciate you including that.
Yeah, it's tough because we don't get these scores until late October in terms of the PVAS and the PSSAs. So to make decisions about placement or growth, they're not very helpful until after the fact.
And we're starting to see this data come out later and later in the fall. It's a few weeks even behind last year. Which is super frustrating because it's great to look at, but if we didn't have the metrics that Mrs. Webb just reviewed and that our teachers were implementing and looking at, I mean, we would make zero progress waiting for this data to come out. It's not nearly as impactful as what Mrs. Webb just and K-12 we're doing diagnostics like that.
When you were talking about the PVAS cohort tracking, you were saying that, with those 50s and 60s, the number of the enter and exit scores, I thought I heard you say we were in the 80th percentile. So if you look at the scores we already have, regardless of, growth, and we touched upon that and the stretch of the test and all that, what is an average score, or that's on a scale of? So if I say a 68.3 on a scale of what, or did you indeed say 80th
That's the normal
percentile, or?
curve equivalent. So it's where we fall on
So
that normal curve.
Those are percentiles.
It's not quite percentiles.
Okay.
I'd have to pull it up.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just making sure I was understanding what you were saying with where we were falling, and you were saying these are high scores, even though the growth
it says
was low.
63. So if you're thinking 63 to a layperson, right, you're thinking, oh, that's a D. Right?
That's why I was asking what the
if
scale
you think
was.
report cards,
right?
But in reality, that 63, when you look at the bell curve, is at the actual 80th percentile.
And that's
of
what I
where,
thought I heard you say. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
We outpace the other, group of 100, let's say.
Thanks. And I know, Steve, the IXL graphic was the mountain and the circle. It was really helpful. I thought that was great. The question I had, and not to answer, but in general, I know we've had discussions here, maybe in the community, the time spent, the graphic of school hours out of 4,000 and some, looks like 75% of those hours were in school and 25% were at home. Is that something that is universal? Like when we see how much practice a student has at home, or is that, for example, of the 4,000 hours spent on IXL by middle school students, some students might have spent 75% at home and 25% in school, and or is this a true measure of the appropriation of hours in home and school?
That's what we want to see. That's our expectation. Most teachers tell students that they should be spending 20 to 25 minutes on each IXL because it makes up that 45-minute period if they have 2 of them due per week. If they're spending more than that, like if they're in an instrument and so they aren't in the Spartan period where they have a time to do that, they might have to do it at home. And in those cases, the recommendation is if you're spending more than 30 minutes, stop where you are, come in, see your teacher the next morning, because there's something that you're missing and the
Right.
teacher will help with that.
And this graphic is the overall balance that you're
Mhm.
looking for if every student was this average student, understanding
That's
that
the
some
actual
might,
balance. Yep.
Yeah.
But it's what we want to.
school-wide, it's the
Yes.
actual balance.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
Ms. Webb, can you just touch base on what data are you using to offer those families, those students, advanced placement in math? And then as a follow-up, could you just explain with Bella, you had mentioned the example that you mentioned, did that student hit that objective criteria based on standardized testing, or were there other things taken into account?
So that student was right on the bubble. And that's kind of why I picked her, because we looked into it more deeply based on teacher recommendations. So when we look at the placement in the advanced, the honors classes, or the algebra, advanced math classes, geometry, et cetera, we look at their standardized scores, we look at their IXL scores, and then we also take into account teacher feedback on the student work ethic and performance in class. Because if this student had a possibility of achieving advanced but wasn't interested in ELA, or didn't have time to do the homework, or wasn't consistently completing the homework and demonstrating that work ethic in class, that stretch may not have been there because the motivation ties into it. So we look at all of the data and then we make recommendations. Parents can appeal those recommendations, and then we come in and sit down with them to say, here's where your child fell. Here's what we notice about students that have either opted in at this level, or here's kind of the big picture of what we're evaluating.
And are you notifying parents of the option to either appeal, or that this is available? Are parents being notified? And then is this something that you've improved upon over the past year or two, as far as taking into account other aspects other than just standardized testing?
Yeah, we've really mapped it out so it's pretty linear as to what qualifies as an automatic kind of recommendation. And then when we talk about scheduling, teachers are given, they do the recommendation for the student. If the parents have any questions, they can reach out. And then the appeal process is a document stating that they want it reconsidered and they'd like to meet. We have a similar one to what the high school has. And then we'd meet with the parent and consider what the full picture of that child is, including that parent input. Sometimes we agree and say, yes, you're right. I think this would be a great move for this child, based on this compiling of data. They might not have hit all the standards that we look for, because I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it's like 3 out of 4 benchmarks that the teachers put into effect. However, because of X, Y, and Z, we think they're going to be successful as well. Let's move them up. Other times we'll say, we're really concerned about this. If you as a parent still want to do it, you can sign the waiver and opt them in, and we can evaluate at the end of the marking period, the first marking period. But, we have hesitations because of X, Y, and Z. And then we talk about tutoring available after school, that kind of thing.
I think that's great that you're taking into account more than just one piece of data, and I certainly applaud you for that. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn. You've been waiting patiently.
Very patient. Regarding math, we've got the achievement versus growth, and we had just talked a little bit about that for the IS. Would you just enlighten us on some of the specific challenges and reasons for the difference in, let's say, the achievement not meeting the goals, coupled with the below basic numbers for math specifically in this age group and at this school, and why that is, and some of the background to that with regards to advanced math and moving into the new concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big challenge in middle school is that we are starting to go from the concrete instruction and concrete math to a more abstract thinking, especially with algebra and 7th grade. The typical 7th grade class and the advanced classes are starting that pre-algebra. And so that type of thinking is very different than what they may have done in elementary or K through 6. And so that is a challenge for students. If you look at all state numbers, the statewide average in math is the lowest across anything. And the statewide average in math for middle school specifically is lower than any other category. So we're fighting an uphill battle there as it is. I think students also, the self-efficacy of whether you're a good math student or not starts to come into play in middle school as they start to kind of challenge their own identity. And so we see a lot of different things happening there. And then when we start sorting kids, because this is the beginning of some of that tracking, that teases it out also. And so it's a big struggle, but we're constantly focusing on improving those students. And I have a hard time arguing with students who say, hey, if I'm getting proficient on the Keystone, and you've got to remember, if they're taking Algebra 1 in 7th grade, they have to master all of the 7th grade standards and all of the Keystone standards. And the Keystone algebra standards are the ones that, quite honestly, really matter because they account for, are you going to graduate or not because you passed this test? So if I was a 7th grade student, allocating my time and energy, it'd be focused on that algebra Keystone, not necessarily on the 7th grade standards. And the same thing goes for the 8th graders that are taking algebra or geometry. They're looking to pursue that high level calculus at the high school. And so their focus is on the advanced standards, not the 8th grade standards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for that. And then just to follow on, I had talked about this a couple years ago with regard to the aspect of math and specifically in how when a student falls behind, it's hard to catch up in comparison to other subject matter. How does that impact this, do you believe?
I think that plays a huge role. If you're struggling in math because math builds on itself and there's new skills that if you haven't mastered those foundational skills, moving to the next skill makes it very difficult. That's something that our interventions in the Title I program really work on. They try to fill in the gaps for part of the time while also supporting the students in their current curricular classwork. And so they're trying to kind of fill in from behind and catch them up, but also provide support where they are. So we're doing a lot of that. And you start to see those gaps widen, unfortunately, when you hit middle school, especially for math. And then they tend to continue on at the high school, unfortunately, because students struggle in math. And if they don't have those middle school foundational skills, it's really hard to keep going into algebra.
Thanks for all that.
Thank you. I know you have another event you need to go.
Yes.
So
Sports banquet.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Webb. Mr. Miller for the high school. It's the closer. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you saw this data and you have a full understanding because now I'm going to screw you all up royally. Because as usual, the high school decides to do everything completely differently. So for the high school, when we talk about all of our data from state testing, we do it in a cohort fashion, meaning that everything is waiting until the 11th grade year has completed. So all of our data is talking about our current seniors. So they could have taken this test 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. Now it's compiled into one grouping, or as Mrs. Webb concluded, some of these kids took it in 7th and 8th grade, and now they're finally getting their data shown here in front of me. So the first two things I want to point out is that two things have to happen with Algebra 1. We have an SLSD total, and we have an Southern Lehigh High School only. The total one shows what happens when the students take it in 7th and 8th grade, compiled with those who take it in the high school. As you can see, we're well above the state average. That's at 40.2, with 67.5% of our students across the current cohort achieving in advanced and proficient. When we break it down and we take out our 7th, 8th grade high achieving students, those who took it in high school, we had a 49.1% proficient or advanced, and we were still above the state average. So even those students that were struggling in middle school math are still achieving over the state standard when they come to the high school. In terms of our biology keystone, biology, again, is one of those things only at the high school is taken in their freshman year. The state average is at 59.2. And we are currently at 67% proficient and advanced. I will say this mark is a little misleading because we do not do a retest to have some of those students move up in this category because of the way science is broken down with biology, chemistry, physics. It's actually at a disadvantage to have them try and do a crash course in biology after a year off and take a very extensive exam. So for our scores to be above this after 1 year shows that we're doing better than other schools that are doing 2 and 3 rounds of testing with their students with winter Keystone retakes or following spring. In terms of our English, we have been extremely high achieving for the last 5 years and continue that with being well above the state average by over 20 percentage points. This is one of those things where we were so high, the only way you can go is down because you've just been maintaining at so many points. But as you can see, based on that red line for where the state is, we're well above it with 77.5% of our students and proficient and advanced. So taking away the testing, which shows you a little bit, and talking a little bit about our growth, I put together two things. One is our total and one is our high school alone. What I did differently here is I put 3 orange triangles on the slide. The orange triangles were showing where last year's cohort was, and the white dots represent where this year's cohort is. So as you can see, with our Algebra 1 and our biology, we had, as a district, growth in both of those. And in literature, we were so high last year. Again, our growth measure couldn't go any higher. We had hit ceilinged out. But we're still well above the state average when you look at what's occurring. When we go from the total, again, subtracting our students that took it in middle school, and we go to the high school only, you can see we're still well above and growing in the areas of Algebra 1 and biology. With literature, again, we were extremely high. We dipped a little bit, but we're still well above the average of growth and meeting those marks for our students in 10th and 11th grade. While I do value the state testing, and I understand it's important as a comparative for other schools, when it comes to high school, schools range anywhere from 450 kids, 9 through 12, to 4,800 as some of our large partners down south in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia areas. So I really would like to take a time and look at our own specific data for our building, because I like to compare us to us from the previous years. In terms of graduation rate, it might be dying. So we had 94.5% last year. If we do our 5-year cohort data, which the state does do, which incorporates any student who does a deferred graduation for special ed needs, or who chooses to not make the requirements but graduates after September through summer school, we were at 96.2, still maintaining our percentage points where I feel show we have students achieving based on our graduation requirements that were set by the board. We did work on the fact that we look at where our students are going from four-year college to community college and two-year college. Last year, based on our senior survey and definitive information we got from our seniors, we had 78.5 students go on to secondary education. When we talk about less than 4 years, we look at everything from trade schools to students going to community college to JUCOs, two-year colleges with associate's degrees. We look at all of that and compile that into one group, which is a 16.4%. So we had a really good grouping last year, and we're maintaining where we're pushing anywhere from 75 to 80% off to a secondary institution. But we don't just look at that. We look at our military and our workforce as well. While our military and workforce were down, we still had 84.3% of our high school class last year with definitive plans of what to do after graduation. Some of the students were like, I'm not sure. Some were taking a year off. We always get those random pieces where students just, do random things and volunteer work or go on mission trips. Those data points are so small, we don't include them in this piece. In terms of other data with attendance, as Dr. Trinkle brought up, is attendance being critical. Last year, we were recorded at 91.2 officially. As the board brought up to me a couple of years ago, they would like to know about LCTI, the interest we had. This is a hand calculation. We were down to 92%, a small drop, but we still have a ton of students showing up and going to LCTI consistently and achieving very well in their scores. In terms of Chapter 339, we had every student with a full portfolio by the time of graduation. And for our Act 158 report, which we'll do this upcoming December, we are able to track the class of 2024. Everyone had met a graduation pathway of 1 through 6 based on the 8 pathways given to us by the state. In terms of some other markers we do look at National Merit Scholarship. We've been consistent with a finalist and a semifinalist and commended students. These are students who are voluntarily taking the PSAT in their junior year to be a part of this prestigious process. In terms of our SAT scores, we did get our SAT scores in for EBRW and math. We did not have the essay scores. Once again, as Dr. Trinkle pointed out, the data keeps coming out later and later, and we're trying to stay on top of this. So we don't have all those essay scores yet. We're hoping to have them sometime in December. We are maintaining where we are usually with anywhere from the high 500s to low 600s for our English and our math scores in our traditional SAT formats. The SAT did change, and they did tell us that we should look at, don't do the initial comparison as the previous 800 is amazing, 600 is okay. The scores have changed because they're changed the SAT consistently through College Board. So maintaining these with the new scores means we're doing above average. In terms of APs, we broke 400 tests taken in APs last year, which for a school of just over 1,000, that's a lot of AP tests. We had a lot of people proctoring. We had 35% achieve 5s, 36% achieve 4s, and 26% achieve 3s, meaning all the students taking these tests actually earn college credit availability for their post-secondary institutions. In terms of dual enrollment, which has been a major goal of the district, our numbers are down a little bit this year. When we spoke to our students about where we were in terms of numbers, many of them said when they did a little bit more research in advance and determined where they're looking at institutions, some of those institutions had caps on where they were with dual enrollment, and some of them already earned their dual enrollment cap level in their junior year. They felt taking it during their senior year was not advantageous, but right now we're on projection to have over 400 AP tests again this year, and those students are choosing to take AP tests to get college credit and still work towards getting hopefully a semester to 3/4 of their freshman year wiped out so they're not dying financially when they get to the school of their choice. But there's a rationale behind that, good information. Students are using transferability portals to see exactly where their credits can and will go. Some students are looking at very prestigious colleges who have set very, very low marks of what they would accept. Some of the Ivy schools especially have said, we're only taking 6 credits max. So once you hit 12, you exceed your limit, there's no need to do dual enrollment. And that is it for the high school. What questions can I answer for you?
Thank you very much, Josh. Do you capture any data on the ACT versus the SAT?
This time, no, we haven't had, last year we had 15 kids take the ACT. Again, the ACT is one of those things where when we look at College App and in terms of Naviance for where it's going, isn't one of the major data points. Unless a school that a kid is very interested in states you should take the ACT and want your ACT score over the SAT, almost all our students are taking the SAT. This year, in fact, we ran an SAT testing session during the school day just for the Southern Lehigh students, try and make it easier for accessibility and them to get ready for the SAT scores to go off to their colleges.
Yeah, I'm kind of going through this process a little bit with my oldest, and most colleges are test optional, except for probably the very high level colleges, or if you're looking for scholarships. And you saw how well we generally do in science, and the ACT has a science section, which may be beneficial for some students who maybe are a little stronger in the math and the sciences, but maybe not as strong in the literature, in the English. So it's just an interesting thing that I'm starting to learn as well. So that's and then do you mind just touching base? You mentioned that some schools are doing retakes for biology. How many are doing that? I mean, I agree with us not doing it. It doesn't make sense, but
it depends by the school district. When I speak with other principals around the Lehigh Valley, we're one of the districts that provides the PSAT to all of our students. We're the ones who do the ASVAB for all of our students as testing avenues. Other school districts don't do that, but they know because they don't have to pay the extra. They have their kids go back and do winter keystone testing for biology. They do winter keystone test, spring keystone testing, retakes for biology. Every school district is different. I haven't pulled exact data on who has and who isn't. I just know there's school districts do that.
I actually was in a meeting this morning that we addressed that exact question collectively as a Lehigh County. And we're seeing a decrease in that and a focus on state assessments because of the graduation pathways, because there are more ways to graduate from high school. Keystone assessments are one pathway, where it was the only pathway up until a few years ago. We're seeing a reduction in retakes as a result of that. And our schedule, certainly the way you've described it, is I could be a year out of taking biology. That would be a lot of legwork to go back potentially and take that test. But as a group of us this morning, we actually identified that as it's a concern for a focus on state assessments. It's a focus on how do we re-engage people, to our students and our families, to take it seriously if there's other pathways that you can graduate from high school. It's not the singular pathway anymore, which is a good thing. So I think that has some role to play here too. We actually talked about that at length this morning.
I think that's great, and I think it's better, quite honestly, to offer the PSATs and other, other things that are going to help our students potentially achieve higher goals.
Have we tracked, speaking of those, 5 different pathways, I guess now, or 4 or 5 different pathways to graduation? I'm sorry.
There's 8 pathways.
Oh, okay. Have we tracked the trends, as you were talking about who is utilizing which pathways and how those percentages might be starting to shift over the years as people become more?
Yeah, so that's part of our Act 158 data. So we
Okay. I was part of that cohort. My recollection of just everybody kind of got that. You were a COVID kid, so you passed bio, thumbs up, versus.
So there was a stipulation last year not to go with the extreme.
That's okay. You don't have to.
There's just a stipulation saying that if you were waived, you couldn't be part of pathway 2. Saying,
Oh.
You had to get waived out of that and then put in the SAT test.
I got you now. I got you now.
They gave you 1 thumbs up and then said, "Oh no, do this other."
Yeah.
So,
1 thumbs up, 1 thumb in your eye.
I think
Okay.
as we,
that's what it was.
Yeah.
but I think as we
Yeah.
move out of that,
Yeah.
you are seeing 8 potential ways to graduate.
Okay.
Which I think was part of that discussion we had this morning of how will this impact our overall scores in general?
Right. And is there any consideration when you're talking about dual enrollment versus, there's a cap, but dual enrollment versus high stakes testing? I know some kids are great high stakes testers and other kids are not. And do we have, as we gather more data and have more options, is there some programmatic counseling, something in place, or even data that a kid or a family could look at to say, your best bet is an AP test, or your best bet is not an AP test? And because, when kids are new at this in the fall and they first start that course, they might just be thinking, I'll do that. And is there anything that says maybe this would be a better option, when you're considering kind of that piece as we grow our dual enrollment options, and also as we expand?
So in regards to dual enrollment specifically, I think the biggest thing comes into play is where is the student looking to go in terms of transferability? What schools take what number of credits? The other part is some of the dual enrollment credits we have are more expensive than taking a test. So we have some that are $300 for a course, or it's $103 to take an AP exam.
Right.
So some choose to just do the 103. They feel they are well off of testing. They can do exceedingly well, so they take the test. They took 1 maybe in junior year, they can take 2 or 3 their senior year, spend as much money, get more credits. But we always started with, where are you going? Do the transferability, look at your college. We give them a form and a sample letter of what to send to their admissions officers to say, what will you take, what will you not take? These are our programs. How do you work through that process? We usually start that probably mid-junior year with our students, and we get that out to them. We look at what's choosing a true dual enrollment course. It'll be a part of our course enrollment process starting this February when students are picking courses for their senior year.
Yeah, and I guess part of that process, if we're starting that's great. And I will say, as a parent in the district, that communication and that awareness has only increased every year of like for the past many years. And so kudos and thank you for that. I guess my question or my suggestion or slash question is, if we're starting that kind of communication about send this out to your schools and see mid junior year, really the only year that can impact is your senior year. And by then, because we're offering so many dual enrollment and AP options to kids who are even freshmen, perhaps can we look at a different counseling option as kids are selecting classes? I agree with you. And it used to be junior year was soon enough. I don't think with the options that and the opportunities we're giving our students now, I don't think junior year is kind of what's the counseling option for earlier to look at and examine that?
Are you
So-
talking about for pathways to graduation?
I'm talking about pathways to graduation, but also dual enrollment in
Okay.
a sophomore year and AP.
So dual enrollment in our sophomore year is only one course right now, and we have actually, because of this change of our social studies curriculum that was board approved, now that extra AP course that was in 10th grade is not moved to the 11th grade year.
Mhm.
So our 11th grade year is the highest it is in terms of APs and dual enrollment, so is our senior year. We have no dual enrollment courses currently right now in the freshman year.
Right. I misspoke. I'm sorry.
We have no dual enrollment courses in the freshman year.
Right.
Dual enrollment does not start as an option until 10th grade year. We currently have one course eligible in the 10th grade year for dual enrollment. It's the CTA course for the University of Pitt.
Yeah.
Which is one credit, and that gives them a taste of what dual enrollment credit is. They move into their junior year. So we do start it in terms of sophomore year, understanding what dual enrollment is.
Right.
But in terms of them, a lot of students are in 10th grade when we pull them, they do not have a clear-cut picture of where they are in terms of searching a colleges.
Right.
They've never set foot on a college
Right.
campus. They always can't say where to go to. Some have 27 colleges, others have, I didn't even know I had to leave my house. So we're like all over the map.
Yeah.
And we take it in stride with them, but we do start 10th grade talking about it. 11th grade is where the bigger push is for doing that final piece.
Okay. And that course selection and just understanding you as a student, just that piece of which was a better option for you, starting that conversation sophomore year for your course selection junior year is what I'm hearing. Okay, that's where our disconnect was, I think. So the conversation start, yeah. Great. Right.
Let me make sure I did everything I need to for my last year of college, high school push for my college prep.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to get with regards to transferability of these credits. That's the challenge, and that's the challenge you have. Well, guidance has, let me say, in being able to get credits that are transferable to that particular institution of which they don't know yet. So it's kind of a catch-22 in some ways. And then that student takes something, they move into their freshman year in college, and now maybe it's just a credit. It's not acceptable for that particular program. And I don't know how you reconcile that. It's something that I think the engagement with guidance counselors should be very close, and they should know, in my opinion, the school should, Southern Lehigh should know with some of the key institutions that these students are going to, should know what may be transferable so that they can give them some input early enough, because otherwise it could be all for naught, right? And is guidance being, just say, proactive with the students who want to do dual enrollment and engaging and coming up with that strategy, or is that on the onus of the student to say, hey, I'm doing this, and then get the feedback? How does that work?
but again, it's students come up and have a list of 28 schools in Naviance. We're not sure, you know, and again, sometimes we've seen admissions offices at schools change mid-year between their junior and senior year, and we get stuck where we are. So it's a little bit on both. We try and have a very comprehensive catalog, but it's hard to stay up on top of it as quickly as it's changing.
Thanks.
I think it's like almost an impossible task, honestly. But what I would hope is that we are gathering as much data and creating a database and teaching and communicating to our counselors so that they can do their best to communicate to our students and parents. But as a parent who's going through it right now, it's a gamble. It's a gamble, and I think there's onus on the parents and the students as well. You don't know what school you're going to, and I'll be honest with you, I've already spoken to some counselors, and some of the college counselors are not very helpful, to be honest with you, because you don't know until you get to that point, which I'm not at. But if you can I would just continue to suggest getting as much information as possible. And just communicating, being upfront. I think it's a wonderful thing to offer, our students and our families. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you know what? They still learned. And, just a plug, you can utilize 529 money to pay for some of this as well. So if you have parents or grandparents who may be helping out, that can be helpful. Or if parents have saved for that. So that's something that can help pay for it. But no, I appreciate what you're doing, and just the more data you can get, the better. But appreciate it.
Do you know about what % of our students take the SATs?
This year, when we rated specifically for ourselves in the building, we had 171 students out of 257 take the in-house SAT this year.
And they're getting rid of the paper pencil. And did you say that maybe the SAT scores this year might not be compatible to comparing after that?
Yeah. So they've already put out, College Board's already put out 2 main disclaimers saying, please understand with the change in the SAT format and the change in the SAT itself, please don't do the traditional 800-point scores to be a comparative to previous years from 2021 and prior.
Does it impact in any kind of way what we do in Southern Lehigh at all?
I don't really have data on that yet because, as usual with all high stakes testing and College Board run tests, you never know what's going to be on it until it actually happens. And students come back and tell us, and even if they tell us this year, it may be different for next year. So at this point, it's too hard to say.
And I would just share too that my daughter took the anticipation of maybe accounting for college credits. She went to a place that did not accept it, but the experience of her going through the AP program and how rigid and rigorous it was, it was not for naught. And just thank you for everybody that helped prepare her throughout her career. It's one data point, but it's the most important to me. So thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Miller? Now we just have 1 or 2 things to wrap up this presentation, and then we'll be able to move on.
Yes, that I can do. All right, so the first thing I want to say as we come back to why we're here tonight is all ties back to our programming, our curriculum, and things we do in our classrooms every day. I just want to give recognition to our building principals for their fabulous job this evening going through the data with you. I want to give recognition to our teachers. I always say it bears repeating. They are the ones in the classrooms every day doing that work with kids, getting kids to not only achieve but make growth. So everything that you're hearing here, all of these great numbers, it's because of those individuals. So I do want to give lots and lots of credit to those very important people here in our district. But here what you see on this slide is a then and now. So in yellow on the left, what you see is everything that we said last year at this time that we wanted to do based upon the data and based upon what we knew we needed as far as curricular initiatives. So I won't read it all to you, there's a lot there. But when you look at the green on the right, that's how far we've come. And it really is kind of astounding if you take a look. Everything we said we'd do, we've begun to do. We're in the middle of implementing and we're starting to see really outstanding outcomes. So this is not just ELA, math, science. This is across multiple content areas because the achievement of our kids is not just based on what goes on in ELA, math, and science classrooms. It goes on across the board in every classroom in every building. So this is a point of pride, but just wanted to kind of ground this back in. Why do we look at the data? It's for programming, it's for student outcomes. So looking ahead, we want to make sure that we always have our eye on the future and what are we doing to help support our teachers. So I know that there's been some discussion about what we see in the data, what can we do moving forward. So we have lots and lots of plans for some PD that we're already in the midst of. Continuing to look at program-specific PD for our year 1 and 2 implementations, continuing to provide structured literacy PD for our teachers as part of our upcoming comprehensive plan, PD for our science teachers as we begin to make that shift to the SEAL standards, as well as professional development for our math teachers, not only as we go into this new curriculum review coming up for next year for our secondary teachers, but also for our K-5 teachers, so that they get some curriculum agnostic PD around best practice in elementary math. So, again, I'm going to say what Mr. Pepe always likes to say, this is the main event. So thank you. I know it was a lengthy presentation, but a worthwhile one. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Twinkle just wrap this up.
Thank you to the building administration. Thank you, Dr. Sometto, for all the hard work leading up to this. It was not a small task to organize this and prepare this, given the late arrival of the release. And I suspect we'll get some more stuff tomorrow as projected. I'm not quite sure how that'll impact any of this. We'll let you know. But thank you to all that have been involved, to the teachers, school counselors, IAs, all the staff that help us do this every day. And thank you for allowing us to provide this information to you every year to highlight our great work.
Dr. Trinkle, well said, and certainly agreed that there's a lot of work here that nobody really thinks about and knows. If they only knew.
I mean, Mr. McGinty was very excited about his scatter plots. So I think, but I think it was a great addition. But I think,
yeah,
yes.
he was concerned nobody
Yes.
would ask a question. I just didn't have enough time to ask before he was wondering.
He did. But
Yeah,
I
it was
do,
good.
it's a large, it's a well developed, well earned, and it gives us so much information. And I think for us to make additional moves and provide additional support.
I just want to quickly putting a bow on this thing. We have a lot of this feedback and data, and there's always been, at least over the past couple of decades, a few different camps with respect to this standardized testing. And, the question is, if you don't have something like this with some methodologies and statistics and data and feedback, how else would you suggest that things would change in this process? It's challenging and probably tedious and a big pain in some ways, because there are diversions throughout the year for all classes. So anything on that you could enlighten us?
I mean, I think we have a great combination of assessments that we're using, whether it's state or local or simple tests that we're using in our classes to end a unit. And I think alongside of some great coaching, some great simple PD agnostic supports, like we just mentioned, I think we're doing exactly what we should be with the information we're provided and at the time we get it. But I think we're using our internal measures much more frequently than this. And I think that's what we're really hanging our hat on as far as student success, although these numbers look amazing and there is some work to do. But I think we're really utilizing our internal measures much more heavily to project where we're headed.
Yeah. And I'll just say, and I'll get this quote wrong, but the quote along the lines of, democracy is the worst form of government, but they can't find one better. And that is true of our data as well. We need standardized tests. We need to be tethered to something. But the reality is that we cannot hang our hat, good or bad, on any particular set of scores. But it's the multiple measures that are being put forth tonight that really kind of triangulate where we are and where we need to be. So, again, this is a great team. The board is a great team, and the support that you give to us with respect to all those initiatives come before this board, and the board pushes them forward. So it really is a great thing. And my final thought is we are committed to providing information, be it good or bad. We don't filter. These are our results, and this is where we are with it, and we don't try to sugarcoat it, or this is where we are, and our aspiration together as a team is to always be better. And again, focusing on our great teachers, because there's no piece of research that will tell you anything other than you rise and fall with the quality of your professional staff. So thank you all for this, and thank you, Dr. Trinkle, and your team.
Dr.
Okay.
Trinkle, the information that will be coming in, we'll get that. You'll send it.
I don't think we're going to see I hope that it's not an update to what we just provided. What I think we're going to get is our building score released tomorrow. And I think this information that we presented will be forward facing for the public. We had a preview. We got snapshots of 1 and 2. They do 2 previews prior to the full release. And I think that's for exactly the reason that Mrs. Webb described, is like, hey, I think we are not the only school district that called BDE to question the results, because we did a diagnostic review and don't quite understand where some of these things fell and why. But I think that the information will be forward facing to the public. If you wanted to go to the Future Ready site as a parent, as a community member, you can look it up that way. I also hope that they're releasing our building-based score so we can finalize evaluations. We need that piece to do that.
And just a second, what you said, Dr. Mann, just the idea that this is one evaluation out of many that we use and use in the ground level. And this is just academic. Our kids are not just academic data points. So the administrator that talked about, moving a student from not behaving in a classroom to be able to walk down the hall and get along with other students, it's another measurement that can't ignore.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks to all. All right.
Dr. Trinkle, I have one question.
Yes.
The PSSAs for 25-26, is that mandated by the state to be online, or is there a choice for the district?
I don't believe there is a choice right now. I believe that is the projection. There's a lot of time between then and now for changes and feedback. Okay. But that is the goal, is that I think for specialized circumstances, we'll be able to do that. But I think the idea is that it's all moving in that direction.
Oh, thank you. Just wanted to ask.
And the intermediate school is already using computerized instead of paper and pencil. Is that correct? They've already, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Also, just to repeat, all 6th grade PSSA last year were on a technological device,
right,
as for this year.
Getting ahead so that we have the correct tech, the proper tech at all levels.
3rd
that
grade's
would
coming.
be in 25-26.
Yeah.
Yes, 3rd grade.
All right. Good questions. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Speaking of technology, moving on to technology, we have a motion to consider a motion to enter into an agreement with PSBA for the provisions of Board Docs Pro at an approximate recurring cost of $10,500 per year, pending review. The board received information. I thank administration and also central office staff for previewing and investigating this for us, and kind of a motion to enter into such agreement. Thank you, Ms. Torba. And a second? Thank you, Mr. Carney. Questions?
I just would like to know who and what groups were polled in this to make this this offer to change. I just want to know how it was received and who's interested and all of that to motivate this change.
Sure. Well, the original question came from our board saying, "Hey, could you look into this?" We gathered, we connected with PSBA and a number of our administrators in the office. I know Mrs. Lobley, a whole bunch of people actually participated in a presentation. I think Dr. Ake Little, were you, or maybe Mr. Pepe?
Yeah, because we
Okay.
had looked at Board Docs Lite and we looked at Board Doc Plus, and it just made sense if we were going to go back to Board Docs. Board Doc Plus made the most sense because of the fact that it had the separate workflow for the review and approval process
Yeah.
to get everything up.
So there's no question that it's a helpful program, and it was very well received. And again, they looked into it very carefully at various levels. And from a functionality point of view, it certainly functions better than the Google Docs that we've been using. And the thing, it just comes down to a cost. That's all. And the functionality and the popularity, and I think even Mrs. Gaiman was talking about the searchability. There's certainly no doubt more functionality in the Board Docs Pro than in our current system that we're using.
Thank you.
Can you, regarding the functionality, is it more on from your end, from the administrative end, or is it more from like an end user searching?
Both.
It's both.
Because internally, it creates separate workflows for the approval process so that multiple people are working towards getting things onto the agenda. And yet there's still a gatekeeper at the end that sees that things have been approved and gets on there. Otherwise, it's kind of going back to too many people trying to get into a shared document, and then there's potential for mistakes and things like that. But as far as managing control meetings, designating different publishers, that's all in the plus. And the other aspect of it is the searchability, whether it's internal or external. And there were some other functions that we truly weren't using before, that if you're going to do it, go ahead and level up. It makes sense. And we can use them as a library for other things internally that aren't necessarily shared externally.
Yeah, and I think the policy thing will be easier because I know Dr. Aguilar has been working with PSBA and kind of a workaround to get to
yes.
it. So again,
so right now we actually get a very watered down version of Board Docs through PSBA because we use their policy service, except it's very throttled. So for example, there's no meta search. So we cannot search across different districts in the same policy numbers because the policy book is essentially standardized across different districts. The other one is that PSBA does not review our policies after we finish them because there is no way to upload into the manual our policies and then have their folks on their end review it. So to make sure that it's consistent with protocols and laws and things like that. So we get a sort of throttled version of it, for lack of a better word. The Board Docs Pro would obviously allow us to use all of the functionalities and capabilities, as Mr. Pepe mentioned.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. All right, moving on. We don't have anything under budget, finance, or support services. We have a small human resources report attached. Can I have a motion to approve the personnel items listed therein?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Thank you, Mr. Carney. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Committee reports. I understand we have kind of an extended education committee report. I don't believe we have a policy or technology update. So, Mr. Carney, I see we have our education committee report is a little bit more extensive related to voting items later in the month. So I'll turn it over to you.
I have it written down so I don't get off course. ACMC is scheduled to meet this week. The next LCTI meeting is the same night as our next board meeting, so we'll see what happens there. As far as the education committee, I sent all the board members and education committee what we discussed at our education committee. The education committee met on November 4th. There's no education meeting scheduled for December. At our November meeting, we went over updates on the library renovation plans and full day kindergarten feasibility process. There were 2 parents attending. We reviewed the comprehensive plan process. The plan is due March 31st, so it'll be coming here. And there is a steering committee. The biggest thing that we talked about was math curriculum, specifically for grade 6 extended to grade 12. Specific to, there will be a recommendation made unanimous from the Ed Committee to approve a new math program. A math review committee, a district math review committee was formed in spring that included middle school, high school, and even some elementary teachers so they could see what the higher levels are using. During the next few months, the committee did an internal review. In other words, they looked at our philosophy, vision, and needs, and an external review, and narrowed it down to 4 potential programs, then 2, and then they also looked at other districts. They decided unanimously to go with Big Ideas Learning, which is a Cengage program. They're suggesting a 6-year contract, which is exactly what we had the last time. It's a program that we currently use. This is a newer version of the program. Some of the noted improvements include providing more practice, digital improvements, resources for differentiation, and the amount of opportunities for collaboration. The staff is also familiar with the program since it is one being currently used, so hopefully the transition will be smoother than going to a new product. It also was not the most expensive program considered, which was a nice bonus. Materials will be made available after an approval that hopefully happens next board meeting. So if anybody from the community wants to come in, I know I came in and looked at the last product that we approved for a different curriculum. Professional development will occur next spring if it's approved, with implementation to start in the fall of 2025. The next math review after this one will be at the elementary level. If there's any easy questions, I'll take them. If they're hard, Dr. Trinkle will take them.
Microphone.
Like I said, I sent board members the process, the products, and you can take a look before the next board meeting. But the recommendation from the Ed Committee was to approve.
Thanks very much. You, the only question I had, I believe you mentioned library and a focus group or some sort of, you said something about a library in there? No?
Oh, we did discuss just very briefly the library because it kind of crosses over into
Sure.
into facilities, but on the education side too, we did have our first steering committee with students and staff last week to get their perspective, their feedback on just the renderings that were provided based on the initial discussions that we had with Alloy 5. And I thought it was a substantial meeting. I thought the feedback was amazing from our students and staff. And Alloy 5 was actually very impressed with the student feedback that they received, given what they were seeing for the first time and having discussions about impact, usability, and all the things. That it was about an hour and a half, I think. It ended up being a very extensive meeting. We will be reconvening that committee after Alloy 5 takes some of their feedback and tweaks some of the areas that were recommended. That was last Thursday, I think the 6th.
Okay, great. And I guess tying into, as a part of that, the library is one of those projects that ties facilities and education from a curricular standpoint. Just to tie into a visitor comment from earlier this evening, I do know that in these discussions we were saying that once we have the space, we'll know, but the staffing of that space and also the programming of that space, is that something that steering committee and education committee is looking at? Could you give us a little bit of an insight into that? Because I know I've heard from other students, like, it would be nice to use the library, but we just don't have it, staffed in a way because it's not a programmatic built into our day kind of a thing. So could you talk about that?
That was discussed. Staffing, access, feasibility within a schedule. Those were all very big, large topics that we discussed at length. And I think Mr. Miller too had already had some ideas from the logistics standpoint, from a schedule on how to maneuver that for as we move into that renovation.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, those topics were addressed. No determining factor was made, obviously, because
but they're just important things to consider, and they're being
But those were absolutely discussed.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more on that. Do we have any, facilities committee update at all? I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can feel free to skip.
So basically, the facilities committee, Mr. Boyer, Mr. Mond, and Ms. Cruz have been continuing to meet. And one of the things that came up that provided a little more detail, and that's why Mr. Boyer asked if I would kind of give some of the highlights, is the bids that are scheduled for the roofs. Originally, we tried to incorporate those bids on the same day that we did the chiller replacement, which was October 16th. However, due to a lot of challenges around the measurements up there on the roofs, we have pushed that to the 13th, which will be this Wednesday. Some of the key points are the proactive bid schedule allowed for the additional time needed and keeps us well ahead of the competition. We still anticipate ample opportunity for the bid awards as far as budget and lead time constraints, leaving us well positioned for the work in the summer of 2025. The main reason for the extension in the bid timeline is the roof heights of the existing equipment at each of the locations. New energy code requirements increased isolation or insulation thickness, and field measurements revealed that the district's existing drawings were inaccurate with respect to the specific measurement. And what I'm talking about is you need to have a clearance on the equipment. And currently it was stated that they were 8 inches off the deck, when in actuality they were only 6 inches off the deck. So with the increased insulation to meet the new energy codes, that would present a problem as far as runoff. The significant impact requires raising and/or replacement of existing HVAC equipment and/or exhaust fans. And the reason why we're looking at the potential of replacement versus taking a unit off with a crane, putting it somewhere and then repositioning it and putting it back together. Some of the units are 24 years old with a 25-year life. Okay. However, at the middle school, they're only 18 years old. So it would really not make dollars and cents to prematurely replace some of that equipment, even though it has a 25-year life. We try and get 30 out of it. So that's pretty much what's going on with that. And just to give you an idea, Liberty Bell, we're talking about 6 rooftop units versus the middle school has about 10 rooftop units. The middle school units are larger. And when we're talking about exhaust fans, there's about 12 over at Liberty Bell. There's about 27 at the middle school. So that will end up becoming a base bid for the roof work, and then removal and or raising and repositioning would be an alternate. So while we're considering that as far as cost benefit analysis, we reached out to McClure Company to turn around, and they're on one of the cooperative purchases to see what the pricing would be for some of the replacement of the items predominantly over at Liberty Bell. So then we can weigh what is the cost of removal with the crane, repositioning versus just upgrading the equipment by replacement. Because if you replace it, you got to demo it anyway, and then you're going to put the new equipment in. So that's kind of where we're at. Mr. Boyer, do you want anything else on that?
It sounds like still on track with the timeline to complete through the summer, so we won't have cranes worried about the elementary, starting up school. We're still can accomplish all that. Good.
Correct. And the other point to this that makes a lot of sense is why we were able to get our capital reserve up, because this will clearly increase the scope of those projects, and we'll still be able to award. So we're going to have the bid opening, as I said, on Wednesday, and our goal is to try and see if we can get that through attorney review so we can bring it to the agenda at the end of the month. If not, it'll show up on the December agenda.
Thanks very much.
The only thing I will say, Mr. Pepe, is similar to the last project with chillers. Let's just make sure we check with the vendor on the energy efficiency rebates, specifically the PPL ones, obviously. So
yeah,
just make sure that they're on that again.
And actually, EI is working on those now, and we are eligible for them. So we'll continue that practice. Good point.
Great. Thanks very
Just
much.
a real quick question. What kind of increase in scope are we talking? Are we expecting?
That I do not know yet. I'll know once we start looking at the bids. Along the good news, we have 14 plan holders currently out there. So by, again, being as far ahead in the process, we're hopefully going to see really good bids. And then once we get the actual bids and then get the information in from McClure, then we'll know exactly what we're talking about as far as total scope. And then we'll bring that back to the board, because you're going to have to award the bids.
All right. Thank you. Any other committee reports? Anything I'm missing? All right, there's information only items on the agenda about professional development field trip requests, but I do not believe we have any further visitor comments signed in.
Mrs. Gaiman, just
Yes.
really quick note for other business.
Yes, please do, Mr. Carney. I skipped right over that. Go
No,
ahead.
that's right. November 29th, I had the pleasure of attending the fall theater production. I want to thank the food service for the meals served to the community members. It was a great event, and the Key Club students for volunteering. I love the show, and I always appreciate the talent on display, and looking forward to Legally Blonde musical in the spring.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much. Again, thanks to our veterans and thanks to all the people who made those celebrations happen today. And I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Safe travels, everyone. Thanks. Have a good night.